Welcome to Justice Now. You've reached part 6 of the series of tips for Black workers, and it's about making sure that you are getting paid the amount that you should. I'll give you an example from my own experience. One time I was working with an agency, and I noticed that on my first paycheck, I was not paid correctly. And before, I would just be happy that an amount had been deposited into my account, spend it on rent and food and transportation, and that would be the rest of my day. But I never really took the time to actually look on my pay stub to ensure that the hours were correct and that the pay rate was correct. So what I'm going to recommend is to make sure that you review your pay stubs and you review your hours. And take it even a step further. Every time that you go to work, you put for yourself the hours that you work, and you also put for yourself the things that you've done during the day. This could be easily incorporated into your work journal. I'll let you know the reason as to why this is important, because there's been many instances where people, like myself, have not been paid correctly, simply because they did not look at the pay stubs to see whether or not the hours were correctly entered and whether or not the rate of pay was correctly entered. In my circumstance, the agency was unionized. I went to the union steward. I brought the information over, and it took 2 years, literally 2 years, to have that rectified. And I'd have to say it wasn't even fully rectified, but it took 2 years. It shouldn't take that long, but and unfortunately in my circumstance, it did. But I kept fighting for it to be rectified. And I got a portion of that back. This was mainly due to a fact that one of the managers at the organization at the time was very incompetent and did not register my hours when they should have. So do not rely on people to put in the correct hours and to put in the correct rate of pay. Make sure that you take it upon yourself to protect yourself by writing down how many hours you've worked, the rate of pay you're supposed to receive, and if there's any discrepancy, to contact the payroll administrator immediately, or even HR, or even your supervisor or manager, whomever is responsible for forwarding that information, you contact them immediately. Same with position titles as well. You make sure that your position title is correct, because that is the very thing that you're going to need to ensure that if you go to another job, there's proof that you were in the position you were in. And also position titles, different position titles mean different rates of pay. So you also again want to make sure you're being paid correctly. It's unfortunate that these things continue to happen, and I've came across many people who have encountered this circumstance. They either don't want to really talk about it because it's their only job, they're already having a hard time on their job, and they don't really want to say anything about it. But this is where I urge you to speak up. I urge you to speak up, because a lot has already been taken away from us. It's time for us to advocate, self-advocate, and ensure that we're getting paid what we agreed to be paid. And I use agreed loosely. I don't think anyone really agrees to be paid lower than anticipated. And that also seems to be a constant. um, that oftentimes black workers are paid lower. I would have to pull up the statistics, but I believe it was in the 1990s there was um, a study done, and I'll have to put it up and find it and put it up. But the study said that black workers are paid 15% less. 15% less. That's a high percentage. I mean, it's really shameful that we are getting paid 15% less for doing the same job as the rest of our counterparts. I mean, what makes it even disturbing is that if you even went in to ask for a pay raise of even 10%, you're not breaking even. You're still 5% short, and that should not occur. So be absolutely vigilant in self-advocating to ensure that you're getting paid the amount that you should be getting paid. Another thing to take into consideration is when you're leaving the company. When you've exited the company, you want to make sure that you also put in your resignation letter that you would like all monies owed to you, and any other benefits that are owed to you, you would like all of that included. And the reason why you want to insert this is you are covering yourself and ensuring that the company does due diligence in giving you all that you are owed. Be very, very familiar. I would even say at expert level, be very familiar with the Employment Standards Act. There is an Employment Standard Act for each of the provinces and territories. The Employment Standards Act also has different types of rules for different types of industries. So be very familiar with what type of industry that you're in. And then same with positions. So, full-time and part-time versus, say, temporary workers or workers on contract versus those who are in a union. All are very different. You want to get familiar with that because, and I'll give you another example. There was a situation where I was leaving a company, and I was leaving because I needed a job with higher pay. And as a result, the HR person was adamant that I am to be paid 2 weeks after I leave the position. Well, according to the Employment Standards Act in Ontario, it stipulates that you are to get paid either 5 days from the date, 5 to 7 days from the date of resignation, or your next pay. That means the next time that you get paid, whichever is later. And when I had advised HR, well, they told me that I was wrong. Because I was very familiar with the Employment Standards Act, I then contacted the union steward because it was unionized, and I relayed the same information. In fact, I had the union steward on three-way with the Employment Standard Act's information officer, who also said the same thing that I had mentioned. The union steward went back to HR, and HR had to provide my pay as per the Employment Standards Act regulations. Because if the company does not follow the rules and regulations of the Employment Standard Act, then they will be breaching the regulations. Get very familiar with it. That way you do not have your pay unnecessarily delayed. You don't have your termination pay, and termination not meaning that you're fired. Termination pay meaning that, but even if you were fired, also meaning if you've exited by submitting a resignation, just to make sure that it's not delayed unnecessarily. So that's definitely something to keep into mind for you as another protective measure and resource. So stay tuned. I will provide another tip for Black workers, part 7. I don't know what I will entitle it as of yet, but stay tuned for more videos.